Justice is not merely a rule written in books or a hammer striking a wooden desk. It is a living principle that protects society when power tries to corrupt fairness. In this courtroom moment, when the police chief barged in claiming he runs a town, the entire scene shifted from law to intimidation. The room felt silent not because of his authority, but because everyone present could sense the truth. Power without accountability becomes dangerous. A police chief is meant to be a guardian of law, not someone who uses his badge as a weapon to control, threaten, or dominate. His declaration did not show strength. It exposed insecurity and a belief that his uniform placed him above justice. But the heart of true justice beats strongest when those who misuse authority believe they are untouchable. The judge responded not with anger, not by raising his voice, but by allowing the law to speak louder than ego. In that moment, justice revealed its true identity, not emotional, not reactive, but balanced, calm, and unshaken. When the FBI walked in the courtroom and placed the police chief under arrest, it was not just a legal action but a symbolic restoration of balance. The same badge he misused became irrelevant in front of federal authority. The same power he claimed turned to dust because justice does not bend for titles, ranks, or loud voices. The courtroom transformed from a place of intimidation back into a sanctuary of truth. Everyone witnessing the arrest felt the weight of a powerful lesson. No matter how high someone rises, corruption will always bring them down. Justice may not move fast, it may not shout, it may not always respond instantly, but it moves precisely at the right moment, and when it does, it leaves no corner for arrogance to hide. This moment also reflects a wider truth beyond the courtroom. In society, people often confuse authority with superiority. They believe holding office gives them the right to bend rules or define morality according to their convenience. But real authority is rooted not in control, but in responsibility. A judge who shows mercy, fairness, and dignity possesses more real power than an officer who uses fear to maintain order. The police chief's downfall was not caused by the FBI, but by his own belief that he could replace justice with personal dominance. His words, "I run this town," did not make him stronger. They sentenced him the moment he uttered them. The beauty of this dramatic courtroom turn is that justice arrived quietly, with documents, evidence, and federal enforcement, not with threats or emotional conflict. This is what separates true justice from raw power. Law operates within order, corruption collapses within chaos. The judge didn't need to argue, threaten, or defend himself. He simply allowed the machinery of justice to do what was built to do. The entire courtroom learned a silent but unforgettable lesson. Justice is not fast, but it is undefeated. It sees what ego hides. It waits while corruption celebrates. And then, when the moment arrives, it strikes not to punish blindly, but to restore balance. In the end, that single moment, handcuffs replacing pride, silence replacing arrogance, remains proof that justice always finds its way, especially when someone tries to stand above it. Real strength belongs not to those who claim authority, but to those who respect its boundaries. Power reveals its true face when it stands without accountability, and in this courtroom scene, that truth unfolded with raw clarity. The police chief may have worn the badge, commanded a department, and carried the authority of enforcement, but the moment he used that authority for personal dominance instead of public service, the foundation beneath him began to crumble. A badge is meant to protect, not intimidate. A role of leadership is meant to serve, not rule. Power is fragile when it is built on fear, because fear eventually breaks, and when it does, it breaks loudly. The courtroom atmosphere shifted the moment he declared control over the town, not because his words shook the room, but because everyone could feel the imbalance behind him. This was not leadership speaking. It was ego trying to disguise itself as law. And when ego stands without accountability, justice steps forward, not with sudden rage, but with quiet certainty. Accountability is not just a legal requirement. It is the soul of authority. Without accountability, authority turns hollow, like a grand building with no foundation. The police chief had resources, influence, and status, but lacked the one thing that keeps power clean: responsibility. His leadership had transformed into entitlement, and entitlement always leads to downfall. Those watching understood in that moment that justice is not threatened by loud voices or decorated uniforms. It is threatened only when society allows power to stand without questioning it. The beauty of this moment was that justice did not rush to respond. It waited, observed, documented, and enacted at the exact moment when truth could no longer be overshadowed by position. When the FBI entered the courtroom, the dynamic of power changed instantly. The same chief who walked in with chest puffed, declaring dominance, could not speak a single word when accountability arrived at his side in the form of federal agents. His fall was not dramatic because of the arrest itself, but because everyone witnessing could see him stripped of the illusion he had carried for years, that authority made him immune to justice. Accountability turned his confidence into shock, his dominance into silence, and his arrogance into exposure. True power is never louder than justice. It aligns with it. The FBI did not enter shouting or threatening. They entered with files, evidence, and law. That quiet professionalism made the fall sharper than any verbal punishment. Leadership that fears accountability is leadership already decaying from within. The police chief's downfall teaches that the higher a person builds themselves on ego, the harder justice lands when truth arrives. Authority is not permanent, nor is status. What endures is integrity, something he abandoned long before his arrest. In that moment, the courtroom became more than a legal space. It became a lesson, a mirror showing society that power, when unchecked, ultimately collapses under its own weight. People often believe justice is slow, but justice is not slow. It is exact. It waits for the perfect moment, so the truth cannot be denied. In the end, accountability was not just his punishment. It was his revelation. He did not fall because justice was harsh. He fell because he forgot that power is borrowed, not owned. A badge can be removed, a title can be taken, a role can be replaced, but the consequences of corruption cannot be escaped. His collapse was not the destruction of power, but the restoration of balance. Authority becomes dangerous the moment it forgets why it exists. When someone in power begins to believe that their uniform, title, or influence places them beyond question, corruption does not start with a crime. It starts with entitlement. Sheriff Martinez did not suddenly become abusive in a single moment. Power turned into habit, habit turned into belief, and belief turned into a shield he thought could never be pierced. He had convinced himself that the law served him, not the other way around. That is the earliest sign of abuse of authority. When a leader stops protecting rules and starts using them as personal weapons. In the courtroom, his tone, his body language, and his presence all reflected a man who believed accountability was meant only for others. When he marched into the room to defend his son, he was not motivated by parental instinct alone. He was fueled by a certainty that his position could override due process. That belief is where corruption ripens. A father worried for a child would plead for fairness, but a man accustomed to unchecked command demands exemption. He did not argue the facts or ask for consideration. He declared control and expected obedience. His badge had become a costume of invincibility. And when he spoke, he imagined that the court would bend simply because he walked in. The tragedy of authority is that it blinds itself slowly. A powerful man rarely falls because of one mistake. He falls because he stops seeing any mistake at all. His interference in the legal proceedings showed not just arrogance, but the mindset of someone who genuinely believed justice could be paused, redirected, or silenced by his presence. Yet justice, unlike authority, is not intimidated by volume or posture. The most striking part of this moment was how silently the consequences formed around him. While he raised his voice, law enforcement quietly documented his actions. While he threatened officers with career consequences, investigators listened, recorded, and prepared. Abuse of power rarely sees its own downfall approaching. It stands tall while the ground beneath it is already splitting. When the FBI entered, they were not responding to a single outburst, but to a pattern, years of influence, pressure, manipulation, and entitlement finally reaching their limit. They did not arrest a man. They arrested a culture he had created. His son believed in invincibility because his father practiced it. His department tolerated intimidation because he rewarded loyalty over legality. Abuse of authority rarely destroys a single individual. It infects every space around it until someone stops it. The courtroom did not just witness his accountability. It witnessed the disinfection of power gone unchecked. The moment the cuffs were placed on him, something profound occurred. Not because a powerful man fell, but because the idea he represented fell with him. The illusion that status can outlast truth. His arrest became more symbolic than procedural. The message was not simply that he broke the law, but that the law was never to break or bend. When his badge was removed, it was not the loss of identity, but the unveiling of the person beneath it. Power had shielded him for years, but authority is temporary when it is misused. The law had waited, collected, observed, and then acted with precision. Abuse of authority is not measured by how loud a person speaks or how forcefully they command. It is measured by how far they drift from the responsibility that power demands. Martinez did not fail because he lacked control. He failed because he forgot the purpose of control. The courtroom proved that authority borrowed by title must always answer to authority anchored in law. He was not just punished, he was corrected. His fall was a restoration of balance, the return of power to its rightful scale, and a reminder that leadership without accountability eventually becomes nothing more than a uniform wrapped around fear. Respect is not a rule written on courthouse walls. It is a way of understanding the space, the people, and the system that stands between chaos and fairness. When Derek walked into that courtroom, he did not see a legal institution built to protect society. He saw a stage where he assumed everyone would bow to his last name. His confidence was not rooted in innocence, but in years of witnessing his father bend reality through influence. That upbringing conditioned him to believe that legal consequences were only for those without connections. He mistook privilege for immunity, and that misunderstanding shaped his behavior from the moment he crashed the car to the moment he faced judgment. His disrespect was not a spontaneous reaction. It was learned through example, through watching authority used as leverage rather than responsibility. He dismissed officers, refused sobriety tests, mock procedures, and treated court protocol as if it were beneath him. His language was less about defense and more about domination. Every word from him implied that the law should step aside because someone more important had arrived. Yet the courtroom is a great equalizer. Inside that room, uniforms, badges, political seats, and family positions do not matter. Only truth, evidence, and accountability speak. Derek did not realize that until the judge responded not with anger, but with calm firmness, the kind that disarms entitlement more effectively than shouting ever could. The judge's composed presence, unshaken by intimidation, began to break down Derek's assumptions. In that moment, Derek encountered something his sheltered power bubble had never allowed him to face: boundaries. The shift did not happen instantly. Even as the hearing continued, Derek's tone wavered between defensiveness and disbelief. He could not understand why the same authority his father controlled outside these walls did not apply here. But this was the exact lesson he needed. Not punishment for humiliation's sake, but correction for the sake of growth. Respect for the legal system is not demanded because judges want authority. It is foundational to order. Without respect, rules become negotiable, justice becomes selective, and safety becomes conditional on connections rather than conduct. Derek's behavior demonstrated why respect matters. When ignored, it creates entitlement that threatens fairness for everyone else. Over the course of proceedings, reality finally settled into him. The judge did not deliver his words to destroy Derek, but to hold up a mirror. Every remark emphasized personal responsibility, consequences, and the truth that justice is blind by intention, not limitation. By the time sentencing was delivered, Derek was no longer the loud, dismissive son of power. He was a young man confronting the first real boundary of his life. The transformation was not in the punishment itself, but in understanding why it was necessary. Respect is not obedience born out of fear, but understanding born out of awareness. Derek learned that authority is not a family heirloom. It must be earned through conduct, integrity, and humility. When he later chose to speak publicly about drunk driving and accountability, it was not a forced act but a realization. He began to understand that the courtroom was not a place where he lost power, but where he discovered perspective. Respect for the legal system taught him that true maturity comes when consequences are not avoided but accepted. His arrogance was not erased by a sentence, but reshaped by the lesson behind it. Authority belongs to individuals only as long as they serve justice, not manipulate it. Derek entered thinking the court existed to protect him. He left knowing it exists to protect everyone equally. Real power is often misunderstood, especially by those who have grown up surrounded by influence, money, or authority. Derek Martinez believed that because his father was a county sheriff, he himself could act above the law, that connections, uniforms, and family names could shield him from consequences. He walked into the courtroom with arrogance, slouched against the defendant's table, and spoke with the certainty of someone convinced that rules were for everyone else. In his mind, badges and titles were the currency of reality, and law was merely a guideline to be bent or ignored. This misconception is common among those who equate status with strength, who mistake fear, intimidation, or influence for the substance of power. Derek's actions were not just violations of law. They were a demonstration of his belief that social capital could outweigh accountability. He had yet to learn the hard truth. Real power is not about connections. It is about responsibility and the equitable application of rules. When he tried to argue that his father's position rendered the court powerless, he revealed the fundamental flaw in his thinking. Real power does not come from the ability to control others or manipulate outcomes. It comes from the ability to act in accordance with principles, to uphold fairness even when it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or personally challenging. The judge, in contrast to Derek's inflated perception of authority, held a far more enduring form of power. The authority granted by law, tempered by reason, and exercised without prejudice. That power is invisible to those who only measure strength by size, influence, or fear, but is far more absolute because it does not rely on compliance from those around it. It relies on systems, checks, and principles that transcend individual will. Derek was about to experience firsthand the kind of power that is rooted not in privilege, but in justice. When Derek received his sentence, the smirk disappeared instantly. The reality of accountability hit him harder than any physical force or threat could. He had believed that influence could shield him from consequences, but the law was impartial. His father's authority could not rewrite the statutes, and his personal connections could not circumvent enforcement. Real power, he learned, lies in consistent, unbiased application of rules, the unwavering execution of responsibility, and the courage to uphold standards even in the face of opposition. Power is not the ability to evade consequence. It is a capacity to enforce principle and maintain integrity. Derek's initial belief that his father's position made him untouchable was replaced by a deeper understanding. True authority is measured by accountability, not privilege. The lesson extended beyond Derek alone. Observers in the courtroom, the officers, and even community members witnessing the process saw an example of how justice operates independently of influence. They saw that real strength is not in domination, but in restraint exercised correctly. It is not in threats, but in adherence to law and principle. The outcome of Derek's case was a testament to the idea that power without accountability is hollow, but accountability imbued with fairness creates lasting authority. This principle is not abstract. It is practical, enforceable, and universally applicable. It underscores every interaction within a society where law and order are meant to protect, not oppress. In the month that followed, Derek returned to community as a changed individual. He spoke to youth about the lessons he had learned, not about fear of punishment, but about the responsibility that comes with freedom and the true meaning of authority. He emphasized that real power is not measured by connections, money, or position, but by integrity, accountability, and the courage to uphold fairness even when it is difficult. Derek's transformation serves as a reminder that the greatest lesson any person can learn is that authority without accountability is meaningless, and that the most enduring form of power is the one that respects the law and applies it equally to everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from. True power is invisible, impartial, and unshakable, and Derek Martinez learned that it is a foundation upon which a fair and just society is built.